and welcome back to the Fields of Anfield Road podcast for a very special breaking news style podcast episode today. I am, as ever, your host, Andy Davis, and we are breaking two pieces of news coming out of Liverpool. The first one, the major one coming out, is the imminent arrival of Federico Chiesa from Juventus for a fee of around about 10 to 12 million pounds, as well as the signing of Valencia goalkeeper Giorgi Mamardashvili, who was signed for 25 million pounds plus 4 million in add-ons, and will be sent out back to Valencia next season. He will be joining the team in a year's time. And we are hoping to bring you as well in this episode a friend of mine on the Tripz channel, Ryan Misangyi, who is a very keen watcher of all things Serie A. So I'm hoping to bring him on to just explain how the Chiesa deal has worked in terms of how we got him so cheap. But before we get to here, let's talk about our first signing of the slot era, who technically is not actually a Liverpool player until a year's time, in Mamardashvili. You know, if I'm honest, I'm not going to sit here and say that I've watched Valencia week in, week out. We did see him live on the channel on Trips back in March, but I wasn't keeping a close eye on goalkeepers and all that, and certainly him. So, yeah, I kind of do and don't like the signing. It depends on how we go about this, because we could do the whole thing where we play him ahead of Alisson, like we sell Alisson, which is what I don't want. But it could be a thing where we do what Chelsea did with Courtois and have 3 or so years having him loaned out to Atletico Madrid or Valencia in this case, or Mamardashvili, have him getting experience in, and then when eventually Alisson wants to leave, or maybe he isn't quite the goalkeeper he once was, we can look to bring then in to Liverpool, have him starting, having him had 3 years playing at a good level, which will be, at Valencia, La Liga, still fairly good level, one of the best leagues in the world. So, yeah, I don't mind it too much. Obviously, like all fans, we want Alisson there starting, week in, week out, wanted to be the best he is, but we can't deny it. He is, I know keepers can last till they're 40, but not everyone is Buffon. Not everyone can last till they're 40, and not everyone is Zlatan, not everyone is Ryan Giggs. And Alisson, whilst he is showing no signs of slowing down, we've got to look at the future somehow. And this guy we're signing is young. We can have him still be away from the team for a few years, on loan to good clubs, and then eventually, going down the route of eventually playing him. But it's a long way to go, and I feel like that's something we need to really look at, is the fact that this isn't a signing for now, it's a signing for the future. I just hope that isn't one that's going to be potentially affecting Alisson anyway. I know the contract situation of Trent, Salah and Van Dijk is up for mention, but Alisson, I don't think for a second under any danger of losing his starting spot for the team. So, for first signing in the slot, being a keeper you're not going to play for 2 or 3 years, is a bit underwhelming, but also I do rate the fact that we have gone for someone now rather than when we're absolutely desperate in 4 years' time. Teams are more likely to up the price and all that stuff. I think to get a keeper these days for that cheap, it is a bargain. £25 million in a modern day market is pretty much nothing. So for me, I do like it, but also I would like to see someone else bought for that money maybe this summer, but it is what it is, and we've got to look at the future somehow. So, yeah, not too annoyed. But the Chiesa one is one that I'm really excited about, or am I? It's drawn mixed views on socials between the fan base, between sort of non-Liverpool fans. That we all know how good Chiesa was in Euro 2020, which was subsequently in 2021. We all know how good he was, and he was a guy that was seen as for a long time, one of the best young players in the world, and all that kind of stuff that was attached to him after that Euros, and a good time, on load at Juventus. But injuries have played a massive part in his career, really, and it has really played probably a massive factor in why he's been valued so low. I mean, looking at the stats he has, 26 goals in 137 games for Fiorentina. Joined Juventus, 8 goals in 30, and then that was 30 appearances. And then following seasons, 14 appearances, 2 goals, 21 appearances, 2 goals. But then most encouraging for Liverpool fans, 2023, 2024, 33 appearances, 9 goals. And that is all just in Serie A alone. And then, 3 goals and 17 appearances in 2021 for Italy. Was one of the players of the tournament for Italy as well in that tournament. I think personally should have won player of the tournament, but it goes Donnarumma, and I think there is definitely two sides of the argument of this, because on the one hand he's had injuries, but on the other hand we all know the talent's there, and to get him for that cheap, for basically what we sold, what we got in sell-on value for Dom Solanke, who got £7.5 million from that transfer of his from Bournemouth to Spurs. And considering we signed Sepp van der Berg for £2 million, it might not even be that. Didn't play a single game for the senior team. Sell him for £20 million. Carvalho played 14 games for Liverpool, was on loan, last season. He went for £27.5 million. Both of them went to Brentford. So to get a guy who's, albeit injuries aside, is a renowned international player, played for Italy, he's won tournaments, he's been someone that has been an excellent player, and I think that to get him that cheap is something that I think it goes one or two ways. But we are going to be joined right now by, I mentioned earlier in the episode, a good friend of mine, part of the Euro Tripz YouTube channel that I'm on. With us is Ryan Misangyi. Ryan, how are you?
I'm very well, mate. How are you?
Yeah, all good. All good. Good to hear from you. It's been a while, but it's good to have you on the podcast making your debut and joining us for this part of the episode where we talk about Federico Chiesa. Now, we talked before you came on about the fact that why was he so cheap? Because on the one hand, I'm looking at his injury record, but on the other hand, he played 33 games last season and scored 9 goals, and that's just Serie A alone. You obviously watch Serie A a lot. You're a keen watcher of the league. And you obviously would have seen Chiesa play a lot of times, whether that's for Italy or whether that's for Juventus or Fiorentina. Why do you think he was, so to get him for? We were saying before as well that we basically got £7.5 million from Dom Solanke's sell-on clause from Bournemouth to Spurs, from us selling him back in the day to Bournemouth. Why do you think that? And to get him, get Chiesa for just £2 or £3 million more than that. So someone who was only watching really play in the Euros and was really impressed by him 3 or 4 years ago, why do you think nowadays, in a world where there's transfer fees going for £60 million to guys you never heard of, going to Chelsea, for example, or £70 million for this player, why do you think he has been so cheap of a signing for us, if it goes through the dotted line?
I think there's a few reasons why he is as cheap as he is. I certainly think it's a transfer that caught many, many people off guard, including probably most Liverpool fans and most football fans in general, really. We know that from the very start of the window, Juventus made it very clear that they didn't want him. Thiago Motta was obviously joined as the new Juve manager. He made it clear that he did not fit with the style of play that he wants to implement at Juventus. He doesn't fit in the system. And Juventus had enough, basically. They put him up for sale. And to be honest, the alarming thing was that there wasn't a whole lot of interest reported in him throughout the window. It didn't actually look like he would actually end up going anywhere. There were a few sort of little reports here and there from, the B and C Tech journalists who were just trying to make a name for themselves, but no one of any major note really reported that he could be going anywhere. From what I've seen, it looked as though the most likely scenario would be that he would leave next summer on a free transfer, because he did have 1 year left on his contract with Juve, and that was what the likes of Roma and Inter Milan were reportedly waiting for. So that'll obviously now be gutted that they've lost out on him for next year. But I think for Liverpool, upon looking into it more, it's an absolute no-brainer to bring him to the club. As you mentioned, not long ago, he was a Euro winner with Italy. He's performed at an extremely high level, both internationally and for Juventus in Serie A. And before Juventus, he was with Fiorentina, where he was brilliant as well. And yeah, you mentioned last season, he played a lot of games last year. Like, as you said, 33 league appearances. He scored 9 goals. He got 3 assists. And considering last year he was played as a second striker alongside Dusan Vlahovic, that's not his preferred role at all. He likes being out on the wide. Normally on the right-hand side is where he prefers to play. So we weren't even seeing the best of him last season, and yet he still managed a decent amount of goals and assists. You know, he played relatively well. But Juve, obviously, again, wanted him off their wage bill. He was on a very, very big wage at the club. They're now going in a different direction, going for younger players on sort of smaller contracts, if we can say that. And I think that's the reason why they let him go for so cheap. I am surprised that they did let him go for as cheap as they did, but ultimately they were that desperate to get rid of him because they knew if they weren't, he was just going to sit probably on their bench. Even if he got into the matchday squad for the rest of the season, he would make hardly any impact on the squad. They would have to pay his mammoth wages for the rest of the season, and then they would lose him for free anyway next summer. So anything they got for him was always going to be a bonus for them, really. So I think that's why they ultimately got rid of him for what they got.
Yeah, I mean, I immediately, when I looked at that, I immediately thought, right, the injuries he's had, that's the reason why. But then I looked into his stats, the fact that, he did still play a lot of games last year. And I looked into a little bit about the Allegri sort of situation. And then what you're saying about, which I didn't realise, that his deal was so low left on his contract at Juve. I can see why it is now so cheap.
Well, this is it. And as we said, we all saw how bad Juventus were last season. It was a terrible season for them. Obviously, Allegri was on the brink of being sacked every other game. They weren't playing good football whatsoever. Most of the time, you had Chiesa and Vlahovic stuck as a two striker pair up front, completely away from the rest of the team. So they weren't really getting fed too much. And when you're in a team that's playing that badly, obviously confidence low, especially Juventus, one of the biggest, if not the biggest club in Italian football. Every eye is drawn on them. Every player performance is analysed massively. So with Chiesa, obviously a lot is made about his injuries, but his injury record wasn't actually that horrendous. It was more the ACL injury that he picked up just at the start of 2022. Really, that was a very serious injury that it kept him out practically for that whole season. And I know that's probably what's caused his problems over the last 3 seasons. You look at his last 3 years, and he has missed around 80 to 90 games based on that, because all of the injuries from 2022, most of them have been muscular related. So, you can sort of put them kind of down to the fact that, he tore his ACL, which, as we know in football, is incredibly damaging to a player. But it looks like he's got over that. The fact that he played so many games last season, um, the season before that, he didn't play as many games, and the ones that he did, he looked a completely different player. He wasn't doing any of the things that he used to do. He wasn't running at people. He wasn't trying to get by people. He didn't trust his body to do what it could beforehand, which I suppose comes natural to a player who suffers such a serious injury. But I do think he has now got over it, and I'm very surprised more clubs did not look at the signing, considering how cheap it is. Obviously, I don't know what kind of wages Liverpool are paying. I wouldn't imagine they've pushed the boat out for him. Um, but for you guys, it's a fantastic signing, because when you look at your forwards, I actually thought Liverpool had more forwards than they actually did before I looked. But when you look at your wings, especially, you've got Salah, who will start on that right hand side. You've got Diaz, who will start on the left hand side. But you need players that are going to be able to come on, whether it's 20, 30 minutes before the end of the game, whether it's Carabao Cup, FA Cup, Europa League. These are fixtures where he'll be able to play. Hopefully, they can build his confidence up, get him some minutes in the system, and he could really be a real asset for you guys this season, because he's not just capable of playing on that right hand side. He's very adaptable. He can play on the left very easily. And as we've seen for Juve, although he doesn't prefer to play as a striker, he can play as a striker. And we know Liverpool's forwards are all quite versatile, and that is something that they are looking for. I mean, you've got obviously the two that we mentioned, and then you've only really got Nunes, who's been extremely hit or miss. Jar, who's got his own injury problems, and then Gakpo, who again is a little bit hit and miss as well. So yeah, I don't see any real major downside considering the fee that you've paid for him and the fact that he's probably not on the same kind of wage as he was at Juve. And the fact is, I think it's a well-known secret that this will probably be Salah's last season. And if indeed he does leave next summer, you've got a ready-made replacement there who's already had 1 year's worth of Premier League football and will know the kind of system, will know the style of play, especially if Arnie Slot has a good year and he's still there, which I imagine he would be. So I don't really see any downside to it.
Yeah, it's pretty risk-free. I mean, as I said before, I mean, to get a guy for that cheap, these days is not really much of a fee at all. So I think that's a massive bonus. But if I'm honest, the only thing I will say, like, I'm judging it by albeit 2 games, and apologies for the lack of content over the Brentford game. But those first 2 games, I've been really impressed with the team, and particularly the front three. And I wouldn't mind now if obviously Jota's a big one if he stays fit. But if those three are fit right now on current form, I wouldn't drop any of them. I mean, I would have said Diaz last year or even Salah last year when they were playing poorly towards the end of the year. But so far in the first 2 games, they've looked really good. And I don't know how he gets in apart from injury. And, I have a suspicion that Salah stays long. I've got a suspicion that he may carry on. I do think one of him, Van Dijk or Trent do leave. I don't think all three will sign the contract before the end of the year. I think Salah probably is the most likely, but who knows? But I think that if all three are fit and firing, then I think I don't right now see him getting in. But at the same time, we're playing 2 games a week. You've got Premier League and Champions League. You've got FA Cup and League Cup games as well. You're going to need, as you said, Zaki, you're going to need a depth in squad. And I think that if we're having to rely on Gakpo or Nunes to try and win his trophies and try and win his big games, rotating-wise, I wouldn't put my house on it. So I think to get someone who I've seen do it in the big stages, albeit Euros was mostly behind closed doors, but I've seen Chiesa do it in the matters, and which I've not really seen, certainly for Liverpool, from Nunes or Gakpo, really. So, yeah, I think, if Salah was to leave, I think exactly what you said. You've got a guy there who can play right wing, because no one else can really play right wing. Diaz can play left wing, and that's really it. Jota can do just striker, and that's it. Nunes can play on the left. Gakpo can play on the left, but no one really else, apart from Harvey Elliott, who is way better as an attacking mid than he is a right winger. There isn't many people to choose from right wing, so I think even just this season alone, to have him in, it almost gives Salah a little bit of a break because he is getting a bit old. He is getting older, like we all are, but he is early 30s now, and I think that he at times last year looked tired, looked leggish, looked sluggish. So I do feel like we need, as I said this last year, we need a right winger to sort of come in and give Salah a little bit of a break because he can't play every game at his age now. When he was fit and firing, 2017-18, when he first broke through, prime of his career, you wouldn't drop him for a minute because he always guaranteed he never got injured, still hasn't really got injured for Liverpool, was always in good shape. And I think that nowadays he is showing his age, not just his hairline, but also just his performances on the field. So I do feel, it's exactly what we need, a right winger, and that is, the best thing for us, really.
I mean, it's an identical situation Liverpool have with Arsenal in the fact that obviously Liverpool have Salah, Arsenal have Saka, both play almost every other game. They're extremely consistent. They don't really get injured that often. We saw Saka's mental run of games where he broke the record for Arsenal for such a consistent run. And we're in that situation where we also needed a right winger. And I think it's a deal where Arsenal fans in particular today will look at and think, well, why didn't we potentially look at that? And I think that's something you've got to give credit to the likes of Michael Edwards and Richard Hughes, obviously, for getting that done, because I don't feel like in past seasons, the previous people in charge, obviously before and after Michael Edwards left, that they necessarily would have got that done. I I saw Richard Hughes as someone who mentioned that they were going to be incredibly smart. I think the one disappointing thing for Liverpool this window is, one, obviously they didn't sign anyone, but two, the one area of the pitch where they desperately needed someone was in that defensive midfielder role. They didn't get Zubimendi. Nobody's going to get Zubimendi. He didn't want to leave Real Sociedad. He's turned down everybody. I don't think it's a Liverpool thing at all. So that's the only area for concern. But as we know, to compete against City, you need to have those same quality of players on your bench that you have in that starting 11. And Liverpool didn't have it on that right-hand side. Like I say, you take Salah out, there's no one that can make anywhere near the kind of impact that he makes just to come in. Now they have someone potentially who can do that. Not saying he will. He might take time to adapt to the Premier League. And it's the same thing for Arsenal and for many other Premier League clubs. But I think he's very well suited, definitely, to Liverpool's style of play under the slot. He's very similar to your wingers anyway, especially Luis Diaz. When you saw him at his absolute best, Chiesa, especially for Juventus, he is extremely powerful. He runs at players. He's such a good dribbler of the ball as well. He's quick. He's got such a powerful shot on him as well. As we know, he can score goals, and that is so vital. And you said it yourself, just to be able to bring Salah off, in the 60th, 70th minute, especially if you're comfortable in a game, will help him so much as the season goes on. That in itself is worth, 10 million odd pounds, whatever they've paid for him in total, obviously with add-ons. But yeah, I just, for the life of me, can't see any downside to it. And I think it is a fantastic signing.
I agree, and he is, at time of recording, he has arrived in Liverpool for the final stages of his transfer, which will be the medical, and hopefully I'd imagine we'll be announcing. Well, we have announced the Mamardashvili transfer, but the Chase one, I imagine, will be at some point tomorrow. At worst, maybe on the Friday. Obviously, it has to be at some point soon. Deadline day is approaching, but that is all to come, and yeah, hopefully we'll be seeing Chase with a Liverpool shirt. Now, it will be most likely, I believe, the 14, because he's worn that for Italy, and that is obviously vacated by Jordan Henderson. And yeah, it's, for me, I think it's either that or 15 he'll take. I think 14 is the favourite. Obviously, he could go something completely different, but I think that's where he goes. I think he goes number 14. Number that's quite special to him, I imagine, after winning the Euros in that jersey. So for me, yeah, it's all exciting, and as you said, I would love to have bought in a DM, but it seems that he's happy with Gravenberch there, who hasn't done a bad job albeit against two teams. Not done a bad job so far. And we've got Endo, who I think still brings something, but I don't think he is kind of Slot's kind of player. I think Slot likes guys who are gonna, play the possession-based football and sort of that kind of stuff, rather than the Gegen pressing and high energy sort of play that Klopp had playing for Liverpool. So yeah, it's all exciting, and we are going to bring you a review of the Man U game on Sunday evening. We'll be bringing on, most likely, TalkSport's Tony Folk, who is also a Man U fan, to review the game with me. That'll be out around about 10 p.m. tonight. But before we do go, Ryan, good to have on this podcast for the first time.
Very much enjoyed it, mate.
Well, yeah, thanks for having me on. You are a very good friend of mine, so it's good to finally get you on. And we will surely get you back on in the future, especially when we play the likes of Arsenal, or whether any Italian teams are drawn against us in the Champions League. You'll be the guy to turn to. So yeah, looking forward to getting you back on, and hopefully I'll be seeing you again in person soon.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. Look forward to it.
Yeah, me too, mate. Me too. But that is the end of the Fields of Anfield Road podcast with, as ever, your host, Andy Davis, with guest today, Ryan Misangyi. And we'll see you guys for our Man U against Liverpool review.